Thanks, David.
So now, so I'm David Levitas, Executive Director of Valley Forward, and I'm happy to introduce Kiana from Common Cause to lead this webinar today about the Citizens Redistricting Commission for LA County.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kiana Alsamonfar. I'm the Policy Manager with California Common Cause. We're really excited to join David and LA Forward today, as well as LA County, to talk about what's really a once-in-a-decade opportunity for LA County residents. For those of you who aren't familiar with California Common Cause, we are a nonprofit advocacy group that works on democracy issues. So our mission is to make sure that government works for the people, is reflective of the people, and representative and responsive to the people's needs and interests. And so we work on that mission through a number of programs and issue areas, including voting and elections, campaign finance reform, which we've worked with David on in the past, as well as redistricting. So we're really excited to share more about the LA County Redistricting Commission. This is the first independent commission that LA County is forming for redistricting. And you'll see on your screen the agenda for today. We'll talk about redistricting and why it's important. We'll talk about the LA County CRC, what it means to serve as a commissioner, what the requirements are, and what the application process is. And we'll have some time at the end for you to ask questions. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat, and we'll be sure to answer your question towards the end of the session. I'd also like to introduce Jeff Klein, who's the Manager of Civic Engagement, Community Relations, and Legislation at the LA County Registrar Recorder County Clerk's Office. He's going to be sharing a little bit more details about the application process later on today. So with that, we can start just talking about what is redistricting, just a quick overview. So redistricting takes place every 10 years, and the main purpose of that process is to make sure that districts have equal population, and the purpose of that is to ensure that one person has, every person's voice counts. And so traditionally, elected officials are responsible for redrawing their own district maps. And as I'm sure many of you know, this process can be susceptible to deal-making, attempts to cement advantage of one party over another, or cement incumbent advantage. And so really there's a conflict of interest in having elected officials draw their own lines. And so that's where the Independent Redistricting Commission model comes in. California has really been a leader in this sense. Some of you might have been following the State Redistricting Commission that has been seated just as of last week, which is tasked with redrawing the state legislative and congressional lines for the state of California. That was a commission that was created in 2008 that Common Cause supported. And since then, we've really seen a number of local jurisdictions also adopt similar commissions to take on the redistricting process. So we have commissions on the city and county level, including Long Beach, Oakland, San Diego, Santa Barbara County, and LA County has since joined those jurisdictions and has empowered an independent body of community members to take the lead when it comes to redistricting. So there are a couple values in the Independent Redistricting Commission model. One of them, of course, is the commission's independence. This model removes the conflict of interest that elected officials have when redrawing their own district lines. And by creating a separate body of community members who are also screened for conflict of interest, we're ensuring that the process is carried out in an impartial way that's focused on making sure that community members ultimately have fair maps. Another benefit to the commission model is the level of transparency that it brings. I think with the growth of the commission model, we've seen the redistricting process really come to light. And also another benefit is just the inclusivity. Not only do community members have the power to draft and adopt new maps, but they also include community members in that process and solicit public feedback and incorporate that into the maps that are ultimately adopted. So with that, we can go to LA County's commission. So the LA County Citizens Redistricting Commission was created by state legislation, SB 958. This was in 2016, I believe. And so it tasks a new commission to redraw the LA County Board of Supervisors lines every decade. And the bill is very specific in kind of describing, who can sit on the commission, ensuring that, the commissioners don't have conflicts of interest. It also sets forth redistricting criteria that the commissioners use to redraw the Board of Supervisors lines. It also lays out that the commission is comprised of 14 members, and that the 14 members are selected in a way so that it is proportional to the political party registration in the county. So for those of you who might have followed the state Citizens Redistricting Commission, this is one of the key differences. On the state level, we have 5 seats for Democrats, 5 seats for Republicans, and 4 dedicated to those who are neither Democrat or Republican. In LA County, it's a little bit different in that the number of seats per party is proportional to the party registration. So you can kind of get a sense of roughly how many Democrats, Republicans, and others will be on this commission. If you look at the LA County Registrar's website, you'll see registration numbers, and that'll give you an idea of what the commission might look like. SB 958 also lays out a process and describes that the commission is meant to be independent of the influence of the Board of Supervisors and representative of the county's diversity. And this is really important. I think Common Cause has been working in a number of jurisdictions to help get the word out about, the opportunity to serve on a redistricting commission. And one of our main priorities is to make sure that the commissions reflect the diversity of that jurisdiction. And that's just as important in LA County. I think we have such a large county with so many diverse communities. And so we want to make sure that the commission looks like the rest of LA County. So a little bit about the role of the commission. I think a lot of questions, people usually have questions about, how many meetings does the commission hold? What does the day-to-day look like? And to be honest, a lot of that is up to you as a commissioner if you're seated. There are some legal requirements, some bare minimums that SB 958 lays out as far as what the commission is required to do. But as a commissioner, you're really fundamental in developing the strategy of the commission and kind of building on set forth by state law. So generally, your responsibilities are to hold public meetings and develop the outreach strategy. You'll be instrumental in figuring out how to reach out to LA County's communities and incorporating community members in the redistricting process. You'll also work with census data. You'll analyze that and incorporate that into the redistricting process. And ultimately, you will direct the line drawing process and will really shape what the maps look like. And again, these maps will be redrawn next year and will be in place for the next decade until 2030. As far as the time commitment, again, as a commissioner, you will kind of work out these details with the rest of the commission. But it's worth noting that your term runs until the next commission is seated in 2030. But really the majority of the time commitment will be in 2021. So that's when the redistricting process takes place. That's when you'll be holding most of the public meetings. That's when you'll be doing the line drawing. And once the commission drafts and adopts the maps before the deadline, that's basically where the bulk of the work takes place. It's also worth noting that training and support is offered to you as a commissioner. I think, there isn't an expectation that you'll come to this commission as a redistricting expert. When you're seated, you will be provided training on the Brown Act, on the Voting Rights Act, on the constitutional requirements of redistricting. So that level of support is provided. And you'll also be provided staff to help you carry out your responsibilities as a commission. I wanted to share a couple quotes from past commissioners. So these are some statements shared by commissioners from the 2010 State Citizens Redistricting Commission, and they reflected on their experience redrawing the state legislative and congressional lines, and here are some of the comments that they made. I think generally, they said a lot about how it was a really valuable experience, one of the best public service experiences that they've ever had in their lifetime. And like I said before, it really is a once in a decade opportunity for you to shape the future of LA County's communities for the next decade, so for a pretty long time. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Jeff Klein, and he's going to share more about the eligibility requirements and how you can apply to serve on this commission.
All right, thanks, Kiana. So I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so just a little bit of background about the role of the registrar. So my role at the registrar is manager over civic engagement, community relations, and legislation. And the registrar acts as really a nonpartisan or impartial kind of conduit for the application process. We'll talk about the timeline and sort of what happens once the registrar has finished up with their legally mandated responsibility. But let's talk about the eligibility requirements first, if you're interested in becoming a part of the commission. So first, you have to be a resident of LA County. You have to be registered in LA County to the same political party affiliation for at least 5 years preceding your appointment. Now, I want to point out the preceding appointment is important because there are some restrictions in terms of at the time you apply, and there are some restrictions in terms of preceding your appointment, which would essentially be January 1st, 2021. So 5 years preceding your appointment, you have to be registered to the same political party affiliation in LA County. You also have to have voted in one of the last 3 statewide elections. So that would be the primary earlier this year, the gubernatorial general, and the gubernatorial primary, both of those in 2018. If you're not sure what you voted in those elections, you can't remember if you voted in the primary or the general in 2018, we're going to be looking up your voter history anyway. Just do the best you can when you complete the application and mark the elections that you believe you did vote in. Also, there's a number of disqualifying conflicts of interest. We're going to get into that in a little more detail in just a second. But the disqualifying conflicts of interest apply to both yourself and immediate family members. And so those would be, spouse, parents, children, so forth. So there's a definition of immediate family members and the conflicts of interest actually on our FAQs. And also, I encourage everyone to read SB 958 if you are considering applying and being on the commission. It's good to have an understanding of what the law says. It's not extremely long, so I always recommend everyone to read it, but there's also the FAQs to help guide you through the various questions and so forth. So let's talk about the conflicts of interest. Let's go. We can go next slide. Okay, so conflicts of interest. So this process is really designed to find people who have no bias towards any political entity or another. So this is why they're fairly strict conflicts of interest. And someone brought up a good question in the last webinar, or more of a good comment, is that a lot of people who are interested probably do have some of these connections. So there are people who maybe have good experience, but you really have to abide by these conflicts of interest. So let's talk about them for a second. So you cannot have been appointed to, elected to, or a candidate for office at the local, state, or federal level in the County of Los Angeles, including as a board member. So this again applies to yourself and immediate family members. Also, you cannot have served as an employee of or a paid consultant for an elected representative at the state, local, federal level in the County of Los Angeles. You cannot have served as an employee of or paid consultant for a candidate. So same thing at all 3 levels. You cannot have been directly involved for a candidate. Served as an officer, employee, or paid consultant of a political party, or as an appointed member of a political party's central committee. And also, you cannot have been a registered lobbyist. And so these are for the last 10 years at the time that you apply or submit your application. So again, I mentioned earlier that there's sometimes the requirement applies to when you're seated. In this case, the conflicts of interest are the last 10 years from the time that you submit your application. Okay, and we can answer more questions on that later on, but that's the conflicts of interest. Next slide. All right. Also on the application, there's some essay questions. They're more subjective. You know, the conflicts of interest are pretty objective. You either have or have not had that employment history in your background. The subjective questions, there's 4 of them. We'll go through them, but we also want people to think a little more creatively, dig a little deep when you're completing the subjective questions. More information, the better when you complete the subjective questions, because everything you list will be taken into account in order to determine how much or how best you qualify for this commission. The registrar's job is to find the 60 most qualified candidates from the pool of applications that we receive. So how you answer the essay questions will directly impact basically a scoring system that will allow us to choose the top 60 most qualified. So what are those essay questions? The first one, experience demonstrating analytical skills relevant to the redistricting process and voting rights. So anything you can show that you've done, demonstrated analytical abilities, and this can be both on a professional background, it can be in a personal background, a community organizing background. There's a lot of different ways people use analytical skills, so I would list as much as you feel applies to this question. Okay, number 2. Understand and apply applicable state and federal legal requirements dealing with redistricting and voting rights. So basically, how well do you understand laws, interpret laws, comprehend laws, and apply that information in terms of redistricting, voting rights, things like that. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have worked professionally in this capacity. It can be on a community level, or if you've worked, maybe you are, I think we had a lot of, examples yesterday. What were some of the ones? I thought Rosalind gave some good examples, Kiana, on some of the background.
Yeah, the example she gave was about impartiality, which we'll cover next.
Okay.
But as far as these essay questions go, the ones that we're looking at now, I think just to reiterate Jeff's point, I would just encourage everyone to really think creatively about past experiences that you've had, whether it's professional, in your personal life, in a volunteer capacity. And again, you're not expected to be a voting rights or redistricting expert in order to apply to this commission. What I think we're really looking for is people who have transferable skills to the redistricting process. So when we're talking about analytical skills, have you worked with large data sets? Have you worked with maps? Have you ever facilitated a public meeting or applied criteria? All of these are involved in the redistricting process. And I think that also relates to the second essay question that we're talking about. You don't have to be a redistricting lawyer in order to do this work, but if you have any sort of experience navigating laws, that can be applied to the redistricting and voting rights process.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Transferable skills is what I was trying to remember. Okay, so also possess experience demonstrating impartiality, and that's the one Kiana touched on just for a minute. And this can be, again, in your personal life. Let's say you're an umpire for the local softball game. That's someone who demonstrates a lot of impartiality and has to work with competing sides. Even if you just volunteer and do that, that is something that I think demonstrates great experience in that capacity. And then also appreciate the diverse demographics and geography of the County of Los Angeles. A diverse commission is extremely important. We are the most diverse county in the country in terms of voting rights and voters and so forth. So we are the county, the SB 958 really talks about creating a diverse commission that reflects the demographics of LA County. So understanding and appreciating that, any way you can illustrate that would be great. Make sure you include that on your application. So yeah, so those are the 4 essay questions. If you need additional help or you can't remember some of the ideas we touched on here, if you go to our FAQs, it gives a little bit of guidance. We didn't want to put anyone into a specific corner in terms of what you have to list, because there's so many examples that people can list, but hopefully we provide a little bit of a guide. Okay, so some additional information just to be aware of. And again, I'll kind of give this caveat. We're not trying to discourage anyone. Actually, it's the opposite. We want to encourage as many people to apply as who are interested. But we do want people to be aware of that it is a public commission. It is transparency, like any public commission, is extremely important. And that's something to know as you're going into this process. So you may be required to submit a statement of economic interest. There's some restrictions on your post-appointment once you're done with your service in the Redistricting Commission. So for 5 years after you've served on the commission, you cannot run for office. The commission is a 10-year appointment. Most of the work will be front-loaded. So most of the work will be done in 2021, maybe 2022, but technically you're on the commission until the next Redistricting Commission is put in place in the year 2030, or I guess 2031 would be. So just keep that in mind, but you most likely won't have a ton of work towards the back end of the service. And then also, it is a public process. As mentioned, there is transparency. People can submit public records requests to see any pieces of information that may have been submitted by those who are appointed, those who've applied, and so forth. So we want everyone to be aware of that. Again, it's not to scare anyone or make you feel that someone's going to dig into your personal life. That's not the case. It's just how it relates to this commission. And that is something I think we can all appreciate, for fairness and transparency. I think that's something we all believe strongly in. Okay. Next slide.
Just to add, as far as the Form 700, I think if you're interested to know what that form looks like and what you might need to disclose if you're seated as a commissioner, you can look up that form online on the FPPC's website.
Okay, so how do you apply? We talked about what's required. We talked about sort of all the nuances and the information you need to provide. So there's different ways you can apply. If you go to elivote.net, that's the registrar's website. There's a tab at the top of the page for the Citizens Redistricting Commission. You put in a request to receive an online application, and then one of my team members will send you the application. You can complete it online and then hit submit, and it'll be sent back to us once you've completed it. One thing to note about that, we believe that it has issues with iPads. It's an Adobe program, and Adobe and iPad and Apple doesn't seem to get along that well. So just keep that in mind. If you're ever wondering if we received your application, there's an email on there. You can double check by emailing us. You can also download and print a paper application, complete it, and return it by email if you want to scan it in, or you can mail it to us, or you can drop it off at our headquarters. We're not really open to the public, so if you do want to drop it off, that's fine. Just let us know in advance. We can meet you outside and get the application from you. But we're all the way down in Norwalk. I don't know if people want to make the trek down the 5, but so these are the easier ways online, but obviously we wanted to give people multiple options for returning. Okay, so August 31st is the deadline to apply. And it's basically as long as you get your application in, your completed application before midnight on August 31st, your application's in, we'll start reviewing. We are in the process of reviewing applications as we receive them, but we will take the final from basically all of September to finish reviewing applications. On October 1st, we select the top 60 most qualified applicants, and we post those for 30 days, and that's reviewable by the public. And after that, it'll move on to the auditor controller, and I think Kiana is going to talk about that final process.
Yeah, so after the list of the top 60 is published for 30 days, the auditor controller will randomly select the first 8 commissioners at a regularly scheduled Board of Supervisors meeting. This will probably take place at some point in November. And this is a little bit similar to what happens on the state level with the state commission. But basically, from the top 60, the auditor controller will create 5 subpools, one for each supervisorial district, and they will select one applicant from each of these 5 pools, which means the first 5 commissioners will all come from different supervisorial districts. And then from there, they'll combine all the applicants into a single pool, and then they'll randomly draw 3 more, and that's how you have the first 8 commissioners. From there, the first 8 commissioners will convene, and one of your first jobs as a commissioner is to select the remaining commissioners. So it's a 14-person commission, so you'll be selecting 6 more. And what happens during this process is, you'll really have to pay attention to what the skills and the background and diversity is of the first 8 that were selected, and looking for what the gaps might be on the commission. And so you'll make the selection of the final 6 with that in mind to really help balance out the demographic diversity, the geographic diversity, the background and skills and expertise. And you'll have to look at all of those qualities to select the remaining 6. And the state deadline to seat the full commission is December 31st. So this entire process will conclude before the end of the year, and we'll have a fully formed commission by the start of 2021. With that, I think we can move to Q&A. I know there were some questions
So
in the chat.
I'm going to put the link to SB 958. I just brought it up. I'm going to put it in the chat.
Great, thanks.
Someone asked.
Okay, so let me scroll up and see.
So there was a question about neighborhood council. Does that count? That does not disqualify you. Neighborhood council would not be considered a disqualifying office.
Great.
And then the question about the MacBook, that's Apple. So I just know that one person who was using an Apple Apple product had an issue. So if you want to double check to see if we received it, you can email the email that's on our site, or I'll put my own email in the chat and people can go ahead and email me too. Is being an attorney on a case against the county a conflict? I don't believe so. No, it would not.
There's a question about how to apply to serve as support staff to the commission. That's something that the commission will lead. Once they're fully seated, they'll be responsible for putting out a notice and hiring their own staff. So I think we can look to them early next year for job postings.
Let's see, working on a presidential campaign, I believe that would be, I believe the presidential campaign is federal level, so that would still count, correct? Yeah.
Right, yeah, it says if you've served as an employee of a candidate at the local, state, or federal level, then you do have a conflict of interest.
Working for the county is not a conflict of interest. Only the ones specifically outlined in there. So unless you had some of those other disqualifying conditions, but just simply being employed by the county is not disqualifying. The important thing to know is, and this is something that we might want to bounce off county council. If you do work for the county and you interact with the board of supervisors, there's some restrictions on how this needs to maintain a separation from the board of supervisors to be avoid any undue influence. So if that is something, email me, and then we can discuss it. But if you work in a position, then you never have that kind of interaction. That shouldn't be a problem.
Let's see. There was a question about whether there are conflict of interest requirements for staff. I don't believe SB 958 has that requirement. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. So,
sorry, which staff?
Staff of the commission.
Sorry, say the question
I
again.
think the question is, do the same conflict of interest requirements apply to people who want to serve as staff to the commission?
Oh, yeah, I think it only applies to commissioners.
I also see a couple questions about making the presentation available. Jeff, if you want to check internally, I think I can maybe create a PDF of this and send this to anyone.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Okay.
For your address, you should use your home address because we are going to be looking up the people's voting records. We just want to make sure that one, the address matches your registration, and also part of the diverse commission is based on the different supervisorial districts. So we'll need to know your address to know which district you reside in. So the question, I realize this is a volunteer position, but is there some type of allowance for per diem or expense reimbursement? There is no compensation associated with this. It is considered civic responsibility, civic duty. In terms of if you needed to buy office supplies or something for the commission, I guess that's something I don't know if there's going to end up being a budget for it. Do you know about that, Kiana?
I'm not sure. I think that is probably developed by the commission once it's seated. So again, you'll be making a lot of decisions as a commissioner. And I think budget is probably one of them.
But there is no direct per diem or compensation.
Someone asked in the chat about if you're a volunteer on a campaign, unpaid volunteer, is that a conflict or no?
Let me see. I'm just gonna want to read what it says here. Employee. I think it's only if you're paid or you're an employee, correct, Kiana?
That's how I interpreted it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you just did a night of phone banking, I don't think that would matter, or if you walk door to door. Yeah. I think it's just paid work.
And so, and to be clear, I didn't realize. So it's interesting and news to me that the term lasts 10 years, and so when it says you can't, do these other things for 5 years after, that means basically until January 1st, 2036, you're prohibited from taking on these certain roles, right?
No, it's actually 5 years from the date of appointment. So technically, my understanding is that you will be able to be elected or appointed during your term as a commissioner.
But 2026, basically.
Yeah, basically.
I don't know what I'll be doing in 2026.
Who knows what I'll be doing.
Exactly. I want to see if we got everyone's question. Were there any other questions that we missed? So we want to really encourage people to apply. We want to get as big of a pool of people, applicants, and so forth as possible. So please spread the word.
You have time for one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. What about employment for a state constitutional officer? In other words, a political appointee, not a civil servant.
Will you email me the details on that, and then we can run it by county council?
Okay. Do I have your email?
I put it in there. I'll put it again.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I see a question. If you become a commissioner, does that impede you from serving for an elected until 2031?
Until 2025, 2026, yeah.
26.
Other questions from folks? We have a unique opportunity with Jeff and Kiana on the Zoom, so I want to make sure if other folks have questions, put them in the chat, or you can ask out loud.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that the deadline is coming up pretty quickly. It's about 2.5 weeks away. Jeff, I don't know if you can share, how many applications we've received so far, but I think, we really need more people to apply, and just to emphasize, we really want to make sure this commission looks and represents, the full diversity of LA County. So we're really encouraging people to apply. I think, if you do have a conflict of interest or you're not eligible to serve on the commission, I would really encourage you to identify a friend or 3 friends and encourage them to apply before the deadline. Because we really need, as many applicants as we can get for this process.
Yeah, so we've had close to 600 people request applications, and we've received back about 50 signed applications. So that, again, just to reiterate what Kiana said, I think one of the challenges with this whole process is that a lot of people who would be great commissioners have a lot of disqualifying conflicts of interest. So if you know someone who you feel does a really good job, is a very impartial person, has a really good mind for looking at maps and fairness and all of the different attributes that we're looking for, please encourage them. I know a couple of people that I've mentioned it to that I've encouraged to apply. So, that's something I think obviously the registrar has a legally mandated role, and we're going by what's required by law, but in the spirit of this commission, we want to get really solid commissioners and really talented commissioners so we can have a good redistricting commission.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize, I think the success of the redistricting process really depends on a qualified, impartial, diverse commission. But at the same time, if you're not eligible to apply, don't be discouraged. I think there will be plenty of opportunities in 2021 to engage in this process as a community member, both on the county level, the city level, and the state will also be redrawing the state legislative and congressional lines. And we really need community members to provide input on. There will be more opportunities for engagement next year.
Yeah, there has to be a minimum of 9 public hearings. So there, as Kiana said, there's lots of opportunities for the public to get involved. The type of commitment, time commitment on a monthly basis. So this is how the commission functions, and what's involved will be entirely up to the commissioners to decide once the commission is formed. So hard to really say at this time. And I think also obviously depends on what environment we're in. Setting up a virtual meeting is probably a little less work than putting together an in-person meeting where you have to reserve a location and find a spot and all of that. So at this time, it's the only thing we can say is it's really the commissioners who will determine the direction and the flow and everything about the entire process. All right. All right.
Anything else from folks?
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Let us know if you have questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Stop the recording now.